What would you do if the doctors told you your mother would never open her eyes again? What would you do if they explained in cold scientific terms that the brain of the woman who gave you life was no longer functioning? What would you do if they asked you to consider pulling the plug because keeping her alive was only prolonging everyone's suffering? Sarah Miller heard those words on a Tuesday in October, exactly 3 years ago. She stood in the hallway of St. Luke's General Hospital, her blue housekeeper's uniform still on, because she had raced straight from work the moment she received the call. Her mother, Eleanor Miller, had suffered a massive stroke while watering the plants on her small patio. The neighbors found her collapsed beside the pots of geraniums she loved so much. The water from the hose was still running when the ambulance arrived. Eleanor was 72 years old, and in an instant, everything she was, everything she had been, was trapped inside a body that no longer responded. Dr. Thompson, a neurologist with graying hair and eyes weary from delivering bad news, was the one who explained the situation to Sarah. "Persistent vegetative state," he said. "It means your mother may open her eyes sometimes. She may have sleep-wake cycles, but there is no consciousness. There is no recognition. There's nothing behind those eyes." Sarah listened to every word without crying. She had learned a long time ago that crying doesn't change anything. Crying didn't pay the bills when her husband died 5 years ago. Crying didn't keep her mother fed when Sarah was a child, and they had no money for food. Crying is a luxury that women like Sarah can't afford. Instead of crying, Sarah asked a simple question: "Can I see her?" They led her to the intensive care unit. Eleanor was connected to a tangle of tubes and wires. A monitor marked the slow rhythm of her heart. A machine breathed for her with a mechanical sound that repeated every 4 seconds, and her eyes were closed, as if she were simply sleeping. Sarah walked to the bedside and took her mother's hand. It was warm, alive, but inert. The fingers that had stroked her hair when she was a child, that had prepared thousands of meals, that had sewn hundreds of dresses, now lay motionless on the white hospital sheet. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "it's me. I'm here." There was no response, not the slightest movement. The monitors continued, their indifferent rhythm. What the doctors didn't know, what no one in that hospital could imagine, is that Sarah Miller was no ordinary woman. She didn't have money, she didn't have influence, she didn't have a college education or important contacts. But she had something that science cannot measure and that medicine cannot prescribe. Sarah had faith. Not the superficial faith of someone who goes to church on Sundays and forgets about God the rest of the week. Not the convenient faith of someone who only prays when they need something. Sarah had the deep, unwavering faith, forged in the fire of a difficult life, the faith of her mother Eleanor, who had taught her since childhood that God never abandons his children. That night, Sarah returned to the small apartment she rented near the home of the Caldwells, the wealthy family she had worked for 8 years. She knelt beside her bed, clasped her hands, and began to pray. "Dear Lord," she said softly, "the doctors say my mother won't wake up. They say her brain is no longer functioning. They say there is no hope, but I know that you are bigger than any doctor. I know that you can do what science says is impossible. So I ask you, with all my heart, to wake up my mother. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care if I have to wait years. I'm going to keep praying until she opens her eyes." And so began the ritual that would define the next 100 days of Sarah Miller's life. Every morning at 5:30, before the sun rose, Sarah knelt beside her bed and prayed for 20 minutes. She prayed for her mother, she prayed for the doctors, she prayed for the nurses, she prayed for herself, asking for strength, not to lose hope. Then she got up, showered with cold water because she didn't have a heater, put on her immaculately ironed blue uniform, and walked 15 minutes to the Caldwell's house. She arrived at 6:30, an hour before her contract required, because Sarah believed that hard work was another form of prayer. The Caldwells lived in a 3-story mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Greenwich, CT. Eleanor Caldwell, the owner, was a 52-year-old woman who had inherited a chain of luxury hotels from her late husband. She had 2 adult children who lived abroad, an army of employees who attended to her every whim, and a reputation for being cold and demanding. But Eleanor wasn't a bad person. She was simply a woman who had built walls around her heart after losing her own mother when she was only 16 years old. She didn't know how to show affection because no one had taught her. She didn't know how to be vulnerable because vulnerability in her world of millionaire business deals was a weakness that the sharks smelled from afar. Sarah was the only employee who had lasted more than 2 years in that house. The others quit, unable to bear the icy silence of the woman, the precise instructions that never came with a thank you, the feeling of being invisible in a house full of luxuries. But Sarah understood something that the others didn't. Eleanor Caldwell wasn't cold, she was sad. There was a difference. Sarah had noticed it in small details, in how Eleanor looked at the photos of her mother. That decorated the study, in how her voice broke, almost imperceptibly, when someone mentioned Mother's Day, in how, sometimes, Sarah found her sitting alone in the garden, staring into the void, with watery eyes. That's why Sarah never complained. That's why Sarah always smiled. Even though Eleanor never returned the smile, that's why Sarah did her job with love, even though that love was never acknowledged. And now, with her own mother, lying in a hospital bed, Sarah needed that job more than ever. The health insurance that came with her employment was the only thing that was paying for part of the hospital expenses. Without that insurance, Eleanor would have already been transferred to some place where patients go to die, not to recover. But the insurance didn't cover everything. There were special medications, additional tests, specialist fees that Sarah had to pay out of her own pocket every 2 weeks after paying the rent for her apartment and buying the bare minimum to survive. Sarah gave almost all of her salary to the hospital. No one knew. Neither the Caldwells, nor the neighbors, nor the other housekeepers she sometimes met at the grocery store. Sarah carried her cross in silence, just as her mother had taught her. If you're going through something that feels impossible, if you feel like nobody sees your struggle, if you believe you're alone in your pain, I want you to do something for me. Please, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell, because this story is just getting started. And what comes next will show you that miracles exist. You just have to be patient and wait. At 1 in the afternoon, when Sarah had her lunch break, she didn't go to the kitchen where the other housekeepers ate and chatted. Instead, she walked to the far end of the Caldwell's garden, where there was a small stone bench next to a fountain that no longer worked. There, hidden among the trees, Sarah knelt for the second time that day and prayed. Sometimes she cried while she prayed. Sometimes she just whispered the same words over and over. Please, dear Lord, wake up my mother. Please, dear Lord, wake up my mother. The gardeners had seen her once or twice and thought she was crazy. One of the maids once asked her what she was doing there alone, and Sarah just said she liked the silence. Nobody pushed it. In the world of domestic employees, everyone carries their own secrets. And every night, at 10 o'clock, after visiting her mother at St. Luke's General Hospital, after holding her inert hand for an hour, after reading passages from the Bible, even though the doctor said she couldn't hear anything, Sarah returned to her room, knelt for the 3rd time, and prayed until sleep overtook her. 3 prayers a day, every day, without exception. The first 30 days were the hardest. Not because Sarah lost faith, but because each visit to the hospital was a brutal reminder that nothing was changing. Eleanor remained the same. The monitors displayed the same numbers. The doctors repeated the same phrases. "There are no changes, Mrs. Miller. The prognosis remains the same. You should start considering your options." But Sarah didn't consider options. Sarah only prayed. On the 31st day, something changed. Not at the hospital, at the Caldwell's house. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Sarah was in the garden, kneeling by the dry fountain, with her eyes closed and her hands clasped. She was so focused on her prayer that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching on the stone path. "Sarah!" Eleanor Caldwell's voice made her jump. Sarah stood up so quickly that she almost fell, her heart pounding, her face flushing with embarrassment. "Mrs. Caldwell, I was..." The words caught in her throat. What could she say? That she was praying on company time, that she was using her employer's garden as if it were a church. Sarah lowered her gaze, expecting a scolding, maybe even dismissal. But Eleanor said none of those things. Instead of a reprimand, there was silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. And when Sarah finally looked up, she saw something she had never seen in 8 years of working for this woman. Eleanor Caldwell had tears in her eyes. "You were crying," Eleanor said. "I heard you from the terrace. You were praying and crying. Sarah, what's going on?" It was at that moment that Sarah's wall crumbled. All the strength she had maintained for 31 days, all the composure, all the proud silence, came crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. And Sarah told her everything. She told her about her mother, about the stroke, about the vegetative state, about the doctors who offered no hope, about the bills piling up, about the 3 daily prayers, about the faith that was the only thing she had left. Eleanor listened without interrupting. Her eyes, usually so cold and distant, were wide open in a way that Sarah had never seen. It wasn't pity that was in them. It was recognition. It was as if Eleanor was seeing Sarah for the first time after 8 years. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" Eleanor asked when Sarah finished. "We've been working together for almost a decade. Why did you keep all this in?" Sarah wiped away the tears with the back of her hand. "Because you don't pay me to have problems, Mrs. Caldwell. You pay me to work. My problems are mine." Eleanor stared at Sarah for a long moment. And then she did something that Sarah would never have expected. She sat down on the stone bench and patted the space beside her. "Sit down, Sarah. I think we have a lot to talk about." That afternoon, in the garden of the Caldwell's mansion, 2 women who had lived under the same roof for 8 years finally met. Eleanor told Sarah about her own mother, about how she had died of a sudden heart attack when Eleanor was only 16 years old, about how she didn't have time to say goodbye, to tell her she loved her, to thank her for everything she had done, about how that emptiness had haunted her for 36 years. "I would have given anything, absolutely everything, to have the opportunity that you have now," Eleanor said. "Your mother is still alive, Sarah. Her heart is still beating. Her lungs are still breathing. As long as there's life, there's hope." Sarah nodded, tears running freely down her cheeks. "But the doctors say what science allows them to say," Eleanor interrupted. "But science doesn't know everything. I've seen things in my business life that defied all logic. Companies that should have gone bankrupt and thrived. Treatments that shouldn't have worked and cured. Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it." There was silence. The wind rustled the leaves of the trees. In the distance, the song of a bird could be heard. "Sarah," Eleanor said finally, "how much do you owe at the hospital?" Sarah shook her head. "Mrs. Caldwell, I'm not asking if you're asking me. I'm asking how much you owe." Sarah swallowed hard. "Between the medications, the tests, the specialist's fees, almost $47,000, but I'm paying it little by little." Don't worry. I'm not going to stop working to... Eleanor raised a hand, stopping the torrent of words. Tomorrow morning, I want you to go to the hospital and pay everything, Sarah, down to the last cent. But Mrs. Caldwell, I don't have... Eleanor took her phone out of her pocket and started typing. In 10 seconds, Sarah's phone vibrated with a notification. It was a bank transfer. Sarah looked at the screen and felt her legs give way. $100,000. Mrs. Caldwell, this is too much. I can't accept. I'm not giving you money out of charity, Sarah. Eleanor stood up, her voice regaining some of its usual firmness. I'm giving you a loan. No interest, no fixed terms. You pay me back when you can, if you can, and if you never can, then consider it a gift from a woman who would have given anything for more time with her own mother. Sarah sat there on the bench, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. Eleanor started walking toward the house, but stopped after a few steps. And Sarah, she said without turning around, tomorrow I want you to take me to the hospital. I want to meet your mom. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep, not from worry. Like so many nights before, this time it was something different. It was gratitude. It was awe. It was the feeling that something was changing, although she couldn't explain exactly what. At 10 o'clock, she knelt beside her bed as she did every night. But this time, her prayer was different. Dear Lord, she whispered, thank you. Thank you for not abandoning me. Thank you for putting Eleanor Caldwell in my path. Thank you for giving me hope when I had none left. Now, I ask you for one more thing, just one thing. Wake my mom up. Let me see her eyes open, looking into mine, recognizing me. That's all I ask. The next day, Sarah arrived at St. Luke's General Hospital at 7 in the morning, an hour before Eleanor was due to pick her up. She went directly to the administration office and paid the entire bill. The receptionist looked at her in surprise when Sarah handed over the money. Ma'am, this covers everything you owe and leaves a considerable credit. Are you sure? Sarah nodded. I'm sure. Use the credit for whatever my mother needs. Then she went up to Eleanor's room. Her mother was the same as always, with her eyes closed, the mechanical breathing of the ventilator filling the silence. But something was different. This time, Sarah didn't feel the despair that usually overwhelmed her when she entered that room. Mom, she said, taking her hand. Someone's coming to meet you today. It's my boss. Well, she was my boss. Now I think she's my friend. You always told me that good people come into your life when you least expect it. You were right. She spoke for an hour, telling her everything that had happened the day before. She told her about the transfer, about the conversation in the garden, about how Eleanor had lost her own mother. She told her that she had paid all the bills, that she didn't have to worry about money anymore. And although Eleanor didn't move, although her eyes remained closed, although the monitors continued to show the same numbers as always, Sarah had the feeling that her mother was listening. Somewhere deep down, behind that silence, Eleanor knew she wasn't alone. At 9 o'clock, Eleanor arrived at the hospital in her black Mercedes. She was wearing a simple dress, very different from the elegant suit she normally wore. And in her hands, a bouquet of flowers, red roses. You told me your mom liked flowers, she explained. When Sarah looked at her in surprise, I thought they'd brighten up the room. They entered the room together. Eleanor stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the older woman in the bed. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. She's beautiful, she said finally. She has your same smile. Sarah smiled despite herself. Do you think so? I always thought I looked more like my dad. No, Eleanor shook her head. It's the smile. There's something about the corners of her lips. Even asleep, but you can see it. They approached the bed. Eleanor placed the flowers on the bedside table and stared at Eleanor for a long moment. Then, to Sarah's surprise, she took her mother's free hand. Eleanor Miller, Eleanor said in a soft, voice. "We haven't met, but your daughter has worked with me for 8 years, and I want you to know something. Your daughter is the strongest, bravest, and kindest person I have ever known in my life. You did an amazing job raising her, and now she's doing an amazing job taking care of you." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "Mrs. Eleanor continued, without letting go of Eleanor's hand. "I lost my mother a long time ago. I didn't have the chance to take care of her, to say goodbye, to tell her everything I wanted to say. But you have Sarah, and Sarah's not going to let you go. So please, Eleanor Miller, please wake up. Not for me, not for the doctors. Wake up for your daughter, who loves you more than words can express." The silence that followed was absolute. Only the constant beeping of the heart monitor could be heard, the mechanical whir of the ventilator. Eleanor didn't move. Her eyes remained closed. But something changed in that room. Sarah couldn't explain it. It was as if the air had become denser, more charged with something, as if Eleanor's words had touched an invisible cord that connected everyone present. Eleanor stayed for 2 hours. She listened while Sarah read her mother a chapter from the Bible, the 23rd Psalm. She watched while Sarah adjusted her pillows, combed her hair, put lotion on her hands so they wouldn't dry out. "Do you do this every day?" Eleanor asked. Sarah nodded. "Every day after work. I come, I read to her. I tell her about my day. The doctors say she can't hear, but I don't believe them. My mom's in there, I know it, I feel it." Eleanor didn't say anything. She just nodded, with an expression that Sarah couldn't decipher. That night, when Sarah knelt to pray, she wasn't alone anymore. Eleanor had asked her to add her to her prayers. "Pray for me too," she had said. "It's been a long time since I prayed. Maybe your prayers can do what mine couldn't." The days passed. 35, 40, 45. Eleanor began to visit the hospital regularly. Sometimes she brought flowers, other times food for Sarah, because she knew that she barely ate, dedicating every penny to her mother's well-being. Other times, she simply sat beside Eleanor's bed and talked to her, telling her stories of her own mother, of her childhood, of the hotels she managed. The nurses began to recognize her. At first, they were surprised to see such an obviously wealthy woman visiting a patient in the public ward of the hospital, but they soon got used to it. They even started greeting her by name. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Caldwell, Sarah's inside." Sarah, for her part, continued to pray 3 times a day, every morning, every afternoon, every night. She had already lost count of how many prayers she had said. She only knew that she wasn't going to stop until her mother opened her eyes. Day 50 arrived without fanfare. Sarah woke up at 5 in the morning. As always, she knelt beside her bed. As always, she began to pray. As always. But halfway through the prayer, something happened. She felt a chill run down her spine, not from cold. It was something different. It was as if someone had placed a hand on her shoulder, even though she was completely alone in her room. Sarah opened her eyes, confused. She looked around. There was no one there. But the sensation persisted, a presence, warm and comforting, like an invisible embrace. And then, without knowing why, Sarah began to cry, not from sadness, but from something that had no name, from something that felt like hope multiplied 1,000-fold. That day, when she arrived at St. Luke's General Hospital, Dr. Thompson was waiting for her in the hallway. "Mrs. Miller," he said with a serious expression, "I need to speak with you." Sarah's heart stopped. "Oh no, no, please, dear Lord, no." "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Mom, your mother had an episode this morning," the doctor said. "The monitors registered unusual brain activity around 5:15. Sarah felt the world tilting. 5:15. The exact time she had felt that presence while praying. "What does that mean?" she asked. The doctor sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. It might not mean anything. It could be an anomaly. But there's a slight change in the brainwave patterns. It's very subtle. Probably doesn't mean anything. But I wanted you to know. Sarah ran to her mother's room. Eleanor was the same as always, motionless, with her eyes closed. But Sarah went closer and took her hand, and she would have sworn she felt something, an almost imperceptible movement, a minimal tremor in her mother's fingers. "Mom," Sarah whispered, "Mom, I'm here. Can you hear me?" There was no response. But Sarah no longer cared what the monitors said. She no longer cared what the doctors thought. In her heart, in the depths of her being, she knew that something was changing. Her mother was waking up. The following days were a roller coaster of hope and disappointment. Sometimes, the monitors showed spikes of activity. Other times, everything returned to normal. Dr. Thompson warned Sarah not to get her hopes up. "These changes might not mean anything," he said. "The brain is a mysterious organ. Sometimes it shows activity without any real improvement." But Sarah didn't listen to the warnings. She knew what she knew. Every time she prayed and she felt that presence, every time she took her mother's hand, she felt that little tremor. Something was happening, something that science couldn't explain. Eleanor Caldwell, for her part, had become a constant presence in Sarah's life. She was no longer just her employer. She was her friend. She was her confidant. She was the sister Sarah had never had. One day, while they were having coffee in the hospital cafeteria, Eleanor made a confession. "You know, Sarah, I've never been a religious person. After my mother died, I got angry with God. I blamed him for taking her so young. I stopped going to church. I stopped praying. I thought that if God existed, he was cruel and didn't deserve my faith." Sarah listened in silence, her coffee cooling between her hands. "But watching you," Eleanor continued, "watching you pray every day, watching you maintain hope when anyone else would have given up, something has changed in me. I don't know if I'm going to believe in God again, but I believe in you, Sarah. I believe in your faith, and if your faith can move mountains, then maybe I should stop fighting against it." Sarah reached out and took Eleanor's hand. "Faith isn't about understanding, Eleanor. It's about trusting that there's something bigger than us, trusting that pain has a purpose, trusting that in the end, everything is going to be all right. And if it's not all right," Sarah smiled softly, "then it's not the end." On day 60, something significant happened. Sarah was in her mother's room, reading to her as always, when she noticed that Eleanor's eyes were moving behind her closed eyelids. It wasn't the first time it had happened. Patients in a vegetative state sometimes had involuntary eye movements. But this time it was different. Eleanor's eyes were moving toward the sound of Sarah's voice. Sarah leaned closer, her heart pounding. "Mom? Mom, can you hear me?" The eyes continued to move. Left, right, following Sarah's position as she moved around the bed. "Doctor!" Sarah shouted towards the hallway. "Dr. Thompson, come quickly!" The doctor came running, preparing for the worst. But when Sarah explained what she had seen, his expression changed. He took a small flashlight from his pocket and shone it in front of Eleanor's closed eyes. The elderly woman's eyelids twitched slightly. They didn't open, but there was a reaction that hadn't been there before. "This is unusual," Dr. Thompson said, clearly surprised. "I'm going to order a new brain imaging study. I don't want to give you false hope, Mrs. Miller, but this could be significant." The studies were performed the next day. Sarah waited in the hallway for hours, unable to sit, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. Eleanor arrived mid-morning and stayed with her, not saying much, just being present. Finally, Dr. Thompson appeared with a large envelope in his hands. His expression was indecipherable. "Mrs. Miller," he said, "we have the results." Sarah felt her legs trembling. "What do they say?" The doctor took out a series of images and placed them on the wall-mounted light box. "Look at this. This is your mother's brain image from 3 months ago, and this is from today." Sarah didn't understand much about medicine, but even she could see the difference. In the first image, there were large, dark areas, zones that appeared dead or damaged. In the second image, those areas were smaller. They hadn't disappeared, but they were definitely smaller. "What does this mean?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "It means that something is happening that shouldn't be happening," the doctor said, and for the first time there was something different in his voice. It wasn't skepticism, it was awe. "Your mother's brain damage is healing. Not completely, but it's healing. This goes against everything we know about brain injuries of this type. So, my mom is going to wake up." The doctor raised a hand in warning. "I can't promise that. The brain is unpredictable, but there's a possibility that didn't exist before. A real possibility." Sarah collapsed into the nearest chair. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of joy. Eleanor hugged her, crying too, although she would never admit it later. "Thank you, dear Lord," Sarah whispered. "Thank you. You haven't abandoned me." On day 70, Eleanor opened her eyes for the first time. It was only for a few seconds. She opened them, blinked a couple of times, and closed them again. But Sarah was there when it happened, and she swore that, for a brief instant, her mother looked at her. She looks at her, really looks at her, not with the empty gaze from before, but with recognition. "Mom!" Sarah shouts. "Mom, it's me! It's Sarah!" But her eyes had already closed again. Eleanor had returned to that distant place where she had been for the last 3 years. Dr. Thompson came running at Sarah's cries. When she told him what had happened, Dr. Thompson checked the monitors, examined the patient, and finally sat down in the chair next to the bed. "Mrs. Miller," he said in a serious voice, "I've had a 30-year career. I've seen thousands of patients in a vegetative state, and never, absolutely never, have I seen anything like this. She's going to wake up, right? She's coming back." The doctor sighed. "If you had asked me that 70 days ago, I would have told you it was impossible. Today, I don't know what's possible and what isn't. What I'm seeing defies everything they taught me in medical school. But if I had to bet, I'd bet that your mother is fighting to come back, and it looks like she's winning." Sarah took her mother's hand and squeezed it gently. "Keep fighting, Mom. We're almost there. You're almost back." The following days were a series of small miracles. On day 72, Eleanor moved the fingers of her right hand when Sarah touched her. On day 75, her lips moved as if she was trying to say something. On day 80, she opened her eyes for almost a full minute, and this time, there was no doubt, she was looking at Sarah. "Mom," said Sarah, tears running freely. "Mom, I'm here. I love you." Eleanor's lips moved. No sound came out, but Sarah would have sworn she was trying to say, "I love you too." Eleanor Caldwell was present at that moment. She had become such a regular visitor that the nurses didn't even question her anymore. She took Sarah's hand and squeezed it, unable to speak for the emotion. "Look at that," she whispered finally. "Look at what your faith has accomplished." Sarah shook her head. "It's not my faith. It's the grace of dear Lord. I just refuse to give up." "That's exactly what faith is," said Eleanor Caldwell. "Refusing to give up when everything says you should." On day 90, Eleanor spoke. A single word, barely a whisper, but it was enough to change everything. Sarah was alone in the room, as she usually was at night. She had finished reading the Bible to her mother and was kneeling beside the bed praying silently. Her eyes were closed, her hands clasped, her heart filled with gratitude for every small advancement. And then she heard it. Sarah. Sarah opened her eyes wide. Her mother was looking at her, not with the empty gaze from before, with living, conscious eyes filled with tears. "Sarah," Eleanor repeated, her voice raspy from years of disuse. "My dear." "Mom!" Sarah lunged to hug her, careful not to move the tubes and wires. "Mom, you can talk. You can see me." "I see you," Eleanor whispered. "I always saw you. I was so far away, but I heard you. I heard your prayers. Every day, every night. They were pulling me back. Sarah wept uncontrollably. I never stopped praying, Mom. Never. 100 days. I prayed for you 100 days. I know, said Eleanor, her trembling hand caressing her daughter's face. I know, my love, and I never stopped fighting. For you. Only for you. Dr. Thompson arrived minutes later, alerted by a nurse who had heard voices in the room. When he saw Eleanor awake, conscious, talking, he froze in the doorway. This is, he started to say, but the words caught in his throat. This is a miracle, Sarah completed, turning to look at him with a smile that lit up the whole room. That's what it is, Doctor. A miracle. That night, Sarah called Eleanor Caldwell to give her the news. The wealthy woman cried for 20 minutes straight, something she had never done before, not even when her husband died. I'm coming there, she said between sobs. I don't care if it's 11 at night. I'm coming there. Half an hour later, Eleanor Caldwell entered the hospital room with a bouquet of red roses, the same ones she always brought Eleanor Miller. But this time, when she put the flowers on the bureau, Eleanor Miller looked at her and smiled. You must be Eleanor Caldwell, said the elderly woman in a weak but clear voice. My daughter has told me all about you. Thank you for taking care of my Sarah. Eleanor Caldwell approached the bed, tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Miller, you don't have to thank me for anything. Your daughter has taught me more about faith, love, and hope than I learned in my entire life. Eleanor Miller extended her hand, and Eleanor Caldwell took it. Then now we're family, said the elderly woman. Family doesn't always come from blood. Sometimes it comes from the moments we share. Sarah looked at her mother and Eleanor Caldwell, their hands joined, their tears mingled, and felt her heart was going to explode with joy. In that moment, she knew that everything had been worth it. Every prayer, every tear, every night on her knees beside her bed, dear Lord had listened, and dear Lord had answered. If this story is touching your heart, if you feel that there is hope even in the darkest moments, comment the word faith in the comments. Do it right now. And if you know someone who is going through a difficult time, someone who needs to remember that miracles exist, share this video with that person. It could be exactly what they need to hear today. On day 99, the doctors performed a new battery of tests on Eleanor Miller. Sarah was nervous, although she tried not to show it. Her mother had improved enormously in recent days, but full recovery was still an unknown. Eleanor could talk, although her voice was weak and she tired quickly. She could move her arms and hands, although the coordination was still not perfect. She could recognize people and remember things from the past, although she sometimes confused dates and places. The neurologists were amazed. At medical conferences, the case of Eleanor Miller would become an object of study for years. A recovery of this kind, after 3 years in a vegetative state, simply shouldn't be possible. But there she was, alive, awake, miraculously recovering. Day 100 arrived with a golden sunrise over Greenwich CT. Sarah woke up at 5 in the morning as always, but this time she didn't kneel to pray immediately. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, watching through the window as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky orange and pink. 100 days, she whispered to herself. 100 days praying. And today, my mom is going to open her eyes and see me, really see me. She knelt then, joined her hands, and began her 300th prayer, because that was what they had been. 3 prayers a day for 100 days, 300 conversations with dear Lord, 300 supplications, 300 acts of pure faith. Dear Lord, said Sarah, 100 days ago, I asked you for a miracle, and you gave it to me. Not in the way I expected, not at the time I wanted, but you gave it to me today. I don't come to ask for anything. Today, I only come to thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for not abandoning me. Thank you for showing me that when faith is true, mountains move. When Sarah finished praying, she prepared herself with more care than ever before. She put on her best dress, the only pretty dress she owned, the one she saved for special occasions. She carefully styled her hair. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman different from the one she had been 100 days ago. She was no longer the invisible housekeeper, silently carrying her pain. Now, she was a woman who had faced the impossible and had won. A woman whose faith had moved the universe itself. At 8 in the morning, Eleanor Caldwell arrived to pick her up in her Mercedes. The wealthy woman wore a simple but elegant dress, and in her hands was the largest bouquet of red roses Sarah had ever seen in her life. "Today is the day," Eleanor said with a smile. "The 100th day. Are you ready?" Sarah nodded, feeling tears well up in her eyes. "I'm ready." They arrived at St. Luke's General Hospital at 9. The nurses and doctors who had witnessed Eleanor Miller's recovery greeted them with smiles. Some even applauded as Sarah walked through the hallway. The story of the housekeeper who had prayed for her mother for 100 days had spread throughout the entire hospital. When they entered the room, Eleanor was sitting in bed. She no longer had the artificial respirator. She no longer had most of the tubes that had kept her alive for years. Her hair was combed, thanks to a kind nurse, and she was wearing a new nightgown that Eleanor Caldwell had given her, and she was smiling. "My Sarah," Eleanor said when she saw her daughter enter, "my beautiful girl. Come here." Sarah ran to hug her, careful not to hurt her, but unable to contain herself. The two women cried together, laughing and crying at the same time, saying nonsense things, simply enjoying the miracle of being together. Eleanor Caldwell stood at the door, watching the scene with tears in her eyes. She took a photo with her phone, a moment that would be saved forever. After a few minutes, Eleanor looked towards the door and extended a trembling hand towards Eleanor Caldwell. "Come, Mrs. Caldwell. Come join your family." Eleanor approached and took Eleanor's hand. The three women embraced, forming a circle of love that transcended the differences of class, of age, of history. Dr. Thompson entered shortly after, with a folder in his hands. His expression was serious, but there was a glimmer in his eyes that Sarah had not seen before. "I have the results of yesterday's tests," he said. "Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Caldwell. What I'm about to tell you defies all medical explanation." "What do the tests say?" Sarah asked, feeling her heart race. The doctor opened the folder and took out a series of images. "Look at this. This is the image of Mrs. Miller's brain from 100 days ago. Do you see those dark areas? That's damaged brain tissue, dead, according to all the indicators we know." Sarah nodded, remembering the hopeless words she had heard 3 months ago. "And this is yesterday's image," the doctor continued. "Look at the dark areas." Sarah looked. The dark areas were significantly smaller, but there was something else. There were new, bright areas, where before there had only been darkness. "What are those new areas?" Eleanor Caldwell asked. "Those," said the doctor in a voice full of amazement, "are new neurons, brain connections that did not exist 100 days ago. Mrs. Miller's brain is regenerating." "Is that possible?" Sarah asked. The doctor laughed, but it was not a laugh of mockery. It was a laugh of wondered disbelief. "According to everything I learned in 30 years of medicine, no, it's not possible. The adult brain does not regenerate neurons in this way. But there they are. The images do not lie." "Then what's happening?" "Honestly, I don't know," admitted the doctor. "I have consulted with colleagues from all over the country. No one has an explanation. Some say I should write a scientific article. Others say I should look for errors in the images. But I know what I saw. I saw a woman who had been unconscious for 3 years begin to awaken the same day you began to pray more intensely. I saw improvements that coincided with your visits. I saw a recovery that goes beyond anything that medicine can explain." "Then what do you think is happening, doctor?" Eleanor asked in a soft voice. Dr. Thompson was silent for a long moment. Finally, he sighed deeply. "I have spent my entire career believing only in science," he said, "believing that everything has a rational explanation. But what I have seen in these 100 days has forced me to reconsider many things. Mrs. Miller, I don't know if there is a God. I don't know if miracles exist, but if there is something in this universe bigger than medicine, more powerful than science, you found it, and I am a witness to it." Sarah took her mother's hand and Eleanor Caldwell's. She looked at the doctor with a serene smile. "It's called faith, doctor, and it's available to anyone who decides to believe." The following weeks were a whirlwind of changes and new beginnings. Eleanor was discharged from the hospital after 2 more weeks of rehabilitation. She was not completely recovered. She still needed physical and speech therapy, but she could walk with the help of a cane. She could speak clearly most of the time, and she could, most importantly, live a normal life. Eleanor Caldwell insisted that Eleanor Miller move into the Caldwell mansion while she finished her recovery. At first, Sarah refused. It was too much, she said. She couldn't abuse Mrs. Caldwell's generosity, but Eleanor Caldwell would not take no for an answer. "Sarah, this house has 15 bedrooms and I live alone. Your mother needs care. You need to be near her, and I need to have people I care about close. It's not generosity, it's selfishness in disguise." That's how Sarah Miller and Eleanor Miller moved into a 3-story mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Greenwich, CT. Not as employees, as family. Sarah continued working for Eleanor Caldwell, but it was no longer the same. It was no longer a relationship of employer and employee. It was a partnership, a friendship, a sisterhood forged in the fire of adversity. Eleanor Caldwell hired private nurses to care for Eleanor when Sarah was busy. She hired therapists for her rehabilitation. She hired a chef who prepared the elderly woman's favorite meals. She spared no expense. And every night, the 3 women dined together in the grand dining room of the mansion. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, with Sarah to her right and Eleanor Caldwell to her left. They would chat for hours, about everything and nothing, about the past, the present, and the future. One evening, 6 months after day 100, Eleanor Miller took Sarah and Eleanor Caldwell's hands while they were having dinner. "I want to tell you something," the elderly woman said with a firm voice. "When I was in that dark place, when my body wouldn't respond, but my mind was still there, trapped, I was terrified. I thought I was going to die alone, without being able to say goodbye, without telling my daughter how much I love her." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. "Mom, but then," Eleanor Miller continued, "I started hearing Sarah's voice, her prayers, her readings from the Bible, her words of love, and that voice became my anchor. It kept me connected to this world. Every time I felt like I was sinking into the darkness, my daughter's voice pulled me back." Eleanor Caldwell squeezed Eleanor Miller's hand, unable to speak. "And then," Eleanor Miller said, looking at Eleanor Caldwell, "I started hearing another voice, the voice of a woman who had lost her own mother, a woman who carried her own pain, but who chose to transform that pain into love for a stranger. That voice also helped me. It reminded me that there was goodness in the world, that there were people willing to help without expecting anything in return." Eleanor Miller looked at the 2 women on either side of her. Her eyes were filled with tears, but also with a profound peace. "I was dead," she said, "medically dead. My brain had stopped functioning, but 2 women refused to accept it. 2 women decided that science didn't have the final word. 2 women loved me back to life." Sarah and Eleanor Caldwell looked at each other. They were both crying. They were both smiling. "Now we're family," Eleanor Caldwell said finally. "The 3 of us, forever." Eleanor Miller nodded. "Forever." A year after day 100, Sarah and Eleanor Caldwell founded a non-profit organization. They called it the 100 Days. Their mission was simple: to help families who had loved ones in critical condition to maintain hope, to pray together, to never give up. The organization grew rapidly. What had begun as a small initiative in Greenwich CT soon expanded to other cities across the United States, then to other countries around the world. Today, the 100 Days has a presence in 20 countries and has helped thousands of families. Not all patients recover. Sarah knows that. Not all miracles happen the way we expect them to, but what the organization offers goes beyond medical results. It offers community. It offers faith. It offers the certainty that no one has to face life's darkest moments alone. Eleanor Miller, at 75 years old, continues to live in the Caldwell mansion. Her recovery was almost complete. She walks without a cane. She speaks without difficulty. She cooks the recipes that her mother taught her 60 years ago. And every morning, without fail, she kneels beside her bed and prays, not for herself, but for all those who are in the dark place where she once was. Eleanor Caldwell stopped managing her hotels 2 years ago. She sold them for a multi-million-dollar sum and donated most of the money to the 100 Days. Now, she dedicates her life to the organization, traveling the world, sharing the story of Sarah and Eleanor Miller, inspiring others to believe. And Sarah remains the same humble woman she always was. She still wears her blue uniform when she helps around the house, even though Eleanor Caldwell has told her 1,000 times that it's no longer necessary. She still prays 3 times a day. Even though her mother is no longer in a hospital, she still believes with all her heart that when faith is true, miracles happen. Sometimes, when Sarah is alone in the garden of the mansion, in the same place where Eleanor Caldwell found her crying years ago, she closes her eyes and remembers. She remembers the fear. She remembers the desperation. She remembers the nights on her knees, begging dear Lord not to abandon her. And then she smiles, because she knows that dear Lord never abandoned her. Dear Lord was there the whole time, in the prayers of a devoted daughter, in the kindness of a solitary millionaire, in the silent struggle of an elderly woman who refused to die. Dear Lord was in the 100 Days, and dear Lord is still here, in every heart that refuses to give up, in every hand that reaches out to help a stranger, in every voice that whispers a prayer in the darkness. If you've made it this far, if this story has touched your heart, I want to ask you something. It's not for me, it's for you. I want you to think of someone who is going through a difficult time, someone who has lost hope, someone who needs to remember that miracles exist. Now I want you to share this video with that person. Send it to them in a message, post it on your social media. Let them know that they are not alone, because that's what Sarah did for 100 days. She prayed, not just for her mother. She prayed for all who suffer. She prayed for all who doubt. She prayed for all who need a miracle. And now, I pray for you. I pray that you find the strength to move forward. I pray that you find the faith to believe. I pray that you find the love you need to heal. Because miracles don't just happen in hospitals. They happen in hearts, in decisions, in acts of kindness that seem small but change the world. Sarah's miracle wasn't the 100 days of prayer. The miracle was her decision not to give up. The miracle was Eleanor Caldwell's decision to open her heart to a stranger. The miracle was Eleanor Miller's decision to fight for her daughter from the depths of darkness. Every day, you have the opportunity to create a miracle. You don't need money. You don't need power. You don't need connections. You just need faith. Faith that things can get better. Faith that pain has a purpose. Faith that love always finds a way to win. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in the power of faith. Give it a like if this story inspired you. Comment if you have your own story of miracles to share. And remember, no matter how dark the night, no matter how impossible the situation seems, no matter how many doctors say there's no hope, there is always hope. There is always faith. And always, always, there is love. This is the story of Sarah Miller, a housekeeper who prayed for 100 days, a story of faith, a story of love, a story that proves that when the heart refuses to give up, the entire universe conspires to create a miracle. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. Thank you for being part of this community. Until the next story.